Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I'm your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We will give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Ashley Hart. Ashley is the founder and CEO of She Plays, the first fantasy league organization that focuses on women's sports. Ashley is also a board member of the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association. You can find Ashley on LinkedIn by searching Ashley Hart or by going to she-plays.com. Hello, Ashley. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
Yeah, I can't wait. To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Ashley Hart?
I think success is at the end of the day, you feel like you've worked as hard as you could with as many boundaries as you can to have life outside of work. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess efficiency of time and doing something that you're passionate about would be success for me right now. I think that might change day to day, but right now it's efficiency and doing something purposeful that you're passionate about.
And I think that's important to take away the efficiency of time, but doing something that's important and passionate to you. Because it isn't just about, okay, how quickly can I move through something or how organized is my day? But are you doing it because you have passion for it, because you like it, you love it, you want to be doing it in that moment? And let's talk about that journey a little bit. Ashley, you started the first fantasy league for women's sports in 2019, which to me, when we initially talked, I was like flabbergasted that, you know, it no one thought of this prior to 2019. Which is amazing that you took the initiative and said, there's a missing gap here, and let's fill the gap and really provide fantasy sports for women's sporting events. Would What made you decide to create fantasy sports for women's leagues?
Yeah, and I just wanna make sure that, it's the first one in the US or US based, 'cause I think there have been a couple companies globally which had the same idea, which is great because the idea came around from just what has driven engagement on the men's side. I think at the time that it was really like 2018 when this idea was coming about, spring of 2018, I was trying to find a soccer game. I was in North Carolina trying to find the Orlando Pride soccer game. So women's soccer, the women had just won the World Cup and it was nowhere on TV and I couldn't get a stream. And I was just like, why is this still the case after winning 2 World Cups? Like, why is this still so hard? And so I just started thinking, what's missing? The argument of like, well, they'll never get on TV if they don't bring in the money, and they don't bring in the money unless there's enough viewers, but like you don't get viewers if you're not on TV. So this whole chicken egg thing, I was like, what's existed on the men's side that's really driven people to get games on TV? And it was like sports media attention, just basic attention, and then fantasy sports, because I've played fantasy sports since I was in middle school. I've played like season long fantasy football with family and friends since I was in high school. And like I know NFL players' names I have no business knowing, but they're on my fantasy team, so I know them. So I want to watch. So yeah, it was just kind of this thing of like, oh, that has like taken the NFL and Major League Baseball to entirely different levels. Like maybe they wouldn't even be what they are. Well, they definitely wouldn't be what they are today, but like baseball might have like started to fizzle out as generations kept passing. And so yeah, the injection that they have given to men's sports, I was like, well, shocked as you were to find like it doesn't exist. Let's give it a try and let's see if that engagement tool can really help, you know, curb that argument of, well, you need this for that. It's just like the audience is there. We just need a way to engage them and prove to broadcasters that they should be on TV.
And I think one thing that is so interesting about that is, you came across this idea because you were interested in the game, in this sport. And there's a lot of people like you who sit there and go, okay, I like, whether it's a company or an organization, and you're looking for something and you're like, it's missing, it's not here. And you took it upon yourself, which I think is a great story to say, okay, well, it's missing. Let me provide it. And let me fill that gap. And you really took that calling and you've, transcended that quickly across the leagues, different leagues, and you offer so many things within your fantasy leagues. How have you built that up since the idea came? And what has that journey been like as you grow and try to build it to become even bigger every day?
Yeah, well, so to have this idea to do season-long games and not be any sort of a coder, was hilarious, because I'm not never gonna learn. I've tried to learn some, but I'm not gonna learn enough to make an app in any time frame that we were wanting to have. COVID came in the middle of our journey and really pivoted us away from having live games of any sort, even on our website, to more just, "Okay, let's get really heavy on content." And you just find good partners, people that are passionate about what you're doing, that have the industry experience and knowledge to create this thing. I think the journey's had definitely like ups and downs again with COVID, but also like realizing that the stats or the statistics side of women's sports has been heavily underinvested in. I mean, it's just striking how few companies follow these leagues that have been around for 10, 15 years. So, yeah, some leagues were like helping build that infrastructure with them, to help them get to the next level, even as a professional league, having stats available and creating analysis. So, yeah, it's been a huge learning curve. They say that metaphor, you're building the airplane while you're on the runway is exactly how I've felt. But yeah, you meet a lot of great people along the way. You learn some hard lessons along the way too. But I think a phrase that one of my advisors told me in the accelerator program was, "Don't spend the same money twice." So if you make a mistake and you spend some money that you have to just burn, whether it's through some sort of development or something, you just learn and you're the wiser the next time and you keep going.
And I think that's an important takeaway is don't burn the money twice. Learn from it and grow from it. And I want to circle back to the stats conversation because that is something I actually saw you post recently on your content on LinkedIn. And I was surprised that there wasn't that same information there. Women's sports, okay, maybe not for if we looked back to the beginning of leagues being created, you've the Women National Hockey League that's only a few years old. But some of these leagues, like the WNBA, that have been around for a lot longer, you would think the stats are carrying across, at least this year, the same way the men's stats are carrying across. And so that the fact that data isn't there, what surprised you the most about that? And how have you kind of taken that? Because especially in fantasy leagues, you want the stats, you need the stats to see the positioning. And how have you kind of said, okay, it's not there. We still need the data for ourselves. So, how we're going to integrate that into what we're doing today? But then you took it a step further and you also said, okay, let's close that gap and let's help the leagues close that gap. So I guess it's a three-part question, but what did you do? What was your reaction when you realized that? And then how have you kind of tried to fix that, maybe put a Band-Aid on it in the meantime while you're getting the app going and people interested in learning more about women's sports? And then how have you engaged the leagues to try to fix that?
Yeah, so it was definitely a shock. It was definitely, "Oh, okay, maybe this is why no one's really done this," or, it's sadly a part of the women's sports industry is, "Wow, no one's come along and said we need this." Like, at some point, people invested in men's sports in this way. Stats didn't just appear, right? Someone had to put the investment in. Someone had to put the work and the money towards building something that now they're reaping tons of money off of. The same would be true for women's sports, but sometimes companies, bottom line, they're like, no, that's going to cost us too much this year. They're not looking ahead enough, in my opinion. WNBA partners with the NBA, so their stats are definitely one of the best. But yeah, so surprised, shocked, but also not shocked at the same time, sadly, because I have these conversations all the time on why women's sports shouldn't be at the forefront, and it's insane at this point. But anyway, you do hear that still. Oh, I'm totally blanking on the second part of the question.
Okay, the second part of the question is, what did you do once you figured that out
Oh,
to grow the app?
yeah, so we just tried to find, I mean, I probably emailed and messaged over 20 stats companies of, "Do you have these? Do you have these?" Trying to find as much, one person that had as many as possible, with the leagues that we were wanting to create games with. So yeah, had to do a bunch of research and trying to find the people that had, the one-stop shop. The thing with fantasy apps is you do need stats in order to run a game. Like, you do have to take the real stats and translate it to points on your app. And so if you're getting the stat feed from multiple sources, our developer, which we've had to do for 4 leagues, we have 3 different data sources, right? And he has to translate all of their feeds exactly to fit in. So it's a lot more expensive to make an app because it's different coding. Whereas, if I wanted to start an app tomorrow and have like 7 men's leagues, I could go to one stat provider and have it, including cornhole. So, yeah, I think you just, not hating on cornhole, but like, come on, women's soccer over cornhole stats, come on. And so, yeah, you just get creative and again, you find people who are patient and believe in this and know that this is going to change the game. And then the third one, yeah, we've worked with some leagues. We've worked with a data provider for some of the leagues. We've worked with 2 leagues independently, 3 in our history. And yeah, it's just kind of, helping sometimes them know what's like great to have on an API call. Some are a little bit more ahead than others. And it's just, yeah, really helping them see how they could use this. Like, if they had this available, what it could be used for, that it's a revenue stream for them potentially. And so, really trying to just bolster that up. Again, like, stats take a pro league to another level, I think, and take the coverage that's possible to another level, because you have people looking at numbers and different patterns and things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to.
And I think that's an underlying theme that is important and key here that you were just discussing is, you sometimes have to think outside the box. When there's a problem or something arises that you weren't expecting, you have to pivot. And sometimes it is saying, okay, is this feasible? And it is okay that sometimes, not every time, it's going to work. There's might not be the resources out there, but sometimes it's saying, okay, how can I fix it? There's a problem. What can be the workaround? How can we solve that problem to then deliver the product or service we want to provide in the long run? And then in the long run, as you're doing that, as Ashley has demonstrated, there's been other solutions. Having those conversations with providers on why to provide, for example, the stats for women's teams. What can that do not just today, but 5 years from now? What that can do for the league. And having those conversations, hearing possibly the other side of it, of why they don't do it, and then trying to say, "Okay, this is where your head's at. Now let me take that back and let me tell you, kind of debunk all of those thoughts, and tell you why it's going to work." And those transparent conversations can lead to growth across the board, not just for your organization or what you're doing, but for a whole industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and I think too, like, it yeah, it's hard to, and again, like I said, at some point, someone made this investment in men's sports, and a lot of men's sports got government help as well to get started. that women's leagues are not getting. And so there's this false idea that I don't know that people just think it sprang out of nowhere. And maybe it's people who were passionate about baseball made that investment. And so now there are people passionate about this that are coming along and saying, "Okay, we want to invest in this." There's just a lot of infrastructure to build, but it'll get there, and it'll be the like one of the biggest revenue generations for sports in quite a long time. Women's sports are exploding, and the stats side of it, if someone catches up, they're gonna make a pretty penny off of it.
And I think, women's sports, funny enough, I was hearing a conversation today that women national basketball March Madness just happened. LSU won. Congrats to them. I loved their coach and their whole team and watching them. But the conversation about the girls on the court celebrating and how that is being heightened right now. And it's being talked about on every platform, whether that should be the conversation or not. Um, I don't want to dive into that. But the interesting part of what I heard today on ESPN was the fact that a woman was sitting at the table and she said, I want to thank everyone because even though this conversation is happening and whether it should be happening or not, and her personal thoughts on it, she goes, you just proven to us that you watched the game, that the viewership is there, that you're paying attention. And I was like, yes, because part of the conversation with anything when you're starting something and something's trying to grow is it getting attention? Is it getting, used? You have to be able to back why you're going to do something, why someone should put money in, why you should take that path. And watching the women's March Madness and everyone tuning in and everything, and now this discussion going on for days, it's proving the point that the numbers are there, that the viewership is there, and there is really something to grow these women's leagues off of because it's getting that.
Yeah, I mean, there were 9.9 million people who watched the final. It's the most viewed college event, men's or women's, on ESPN plus people who were streaming. So yeah, it's hard because sometimes I feel like the news is more about how people act versus how they play. That's what gets national media attention. Is there no coverage is bad coverage argument there? Probably still in this day and age, because maybe they're also talking about how they played at some point. But yeah, it's Angel Reese just passed 1 million followers on Instagram. Good, like that's amazing, and that comes from this kind of conversation and helps grow her brand, which is really cool. And yeah, it is interesting. I think that a lot of people in the industry who shouldn't have been surprised by those numbers are like, "Oh, wow. How have we been missing out on this?" And, like, all of us over here are like, "Hello, yes, like, we've been seeing this." But maybe now you'll get on board. Maybe now there'll be, some more attention given, more it was the most games I've ever seen on ESPN, or like normal ESPN channels, not like ESPNU
Mhm.
or ESPN News, so that was great.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I On all of ESPN's platforms, every update was coming up with the women's games, and to some extent, I actually thought the coverage was more for the women than some of the men's stuff. I had to scroll a little deeper to get some of the men's stuff than the women, which I thought was great. I was like, "Yes." Because as someone who has been an athlete myself, I know a lot of athletes, both women and men, and I've managed athletes. It's I went to, Quinnipiac University, so we're D1 across the board. All of our teams win titles. It's awesome. One thing we're especially known for is our hockey team, which, funny enough, we're recording this on a Tuesday, in March, on March 4th. Yes, March 4th. Um, but I will be leaving tomorrow to go to the Frozen Four because Quinnipiac made the men's team, and their women's team almost made the national championships for hockey as well. which was crazy games because in the semifinals they were breaking records. So I was like,
Mm.
yes, but it was interesting managing the teams back, in I started with the team in the fall of 2013. I managed them until I graduated in 2016, 2017. And the women weren't getting the attention. At that point, the Women's National Hockey League was just kind of an idea. They were just starting to get off. Um, but the interesting conversation was you have a men's team who's doing amazing. When I was with them, they made it to the Frozen Four to Tampa. So it just happened that they made it again to Tampa. But we had women playing who were, while they were with us, playing for their home country in the Olympics. We had a coach who was coaching the Olympic team. And none of that seemed, when you see social media posts about schools and teams and what they're doing, none of that was really discussed. You see the men's team when someone gets drafted, how big it is and how crazy it is. And the women, when the league was started, I was still with the school, weren't getting that. A lot of the players got drafted, and it was something that like people didn't really know about, which was crazy to me. I think the men deserve all their attention, but regardless, when you cut it down the middle, the women deserve it too. And I'm really happy to kind of see that starting to really take off. And like you said, go to the next level because now everything's blowing up and they're like, we're here. We've done it. We've been doing it. Now it's just time for you to step aside and watch.
Yeah. Yeah, and not downplay the men's like you said, but just share the spotlight. Like, just give 50% of the spotlight because it's 50% of the athletes. So, yeah, no, it's wild the success that some of these college players and coaches have had that have gone overlooked. That's really cool. That's a cool story and experience that you have.
Yeah. It's really fun because, you know, watching these players and being so close with any players, when I work for the Giants or I manage some guys who go to different teams, you really create a family. And
Mm.
I root for the success of any of the players I've worked with. Whether it was when I was coaching swimming and diving or to when I managed my high school's wrestling team, and some went on. Some have gone on to um, even in wrestling, go professional. And so to watch the career growth in any athlete, the devotion they must have. And for women, I think it's a lot of unsung heroes along the way, like Ashley, who sits here and says, okay, there's a gap. Let's build that bridge so that the women can see and future generations of women have something to do. But it's not just the women. There's, fantasy leagues is something a lot of men get into. It could be a fantasy league, like Ashley said, for cornhole at the end of the day. And men get all into it. So I think you are right 100% that, it will only provide positive things when people can get engaged in the women's side. And it will make players, you feel connected to players. It'll build that relationship of you wanting to know more about a player. Like we said in football, you can have people on your roster that don't necessarily is your home team. You might not know, but like you want to know their stats. You want them to perform well that day. And so I think that having women's fantasy sports league will really do that. Now, Ashley, you decided when creating She Plays to do something a little different. I don't want to say necessarily different, but I think it's a great choice in the growth and what your overall goals are for She Plays. Is you decided to make it free and you decided no betting so that anyone as young as like what was it 12 years old can participate. Um so what made you make that decision that there's not going to be the betting side of it, that we're going to do this for the love of the game and for you to get to know the players and get to know the league and the rules and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just know that there's a big education piece. So I think on our app, it's anyone over the age of 14 can play. And we started with it being free just to it's new. It's a new thing for some folks. It's definitely, our season-long games, our app will always stay. I mean, my hope and plan is that that will always be an offering, right? That maybe we go into sports betting, but that's not gonna be affecting this, that there needs to be the safe, community-driven, season-long fantasy games that you and your friends, or you and the other people in your supporters group can get a team and have a really fun draft night experience, and just, continue the conversation throughout the season. I think there's an education piece even on who are the players that aren't on the national teams. I think that's something that we're trying to bolster, is like the names in this country for women's sports. The big names are the ones that are at the Olympics or in different World Cups. And so trying to showcase that there are hundreds of other players that you'll need to know if you want to draft your team, and be successful throughout the whole season. So yeah, I guess just boiling it down, it's education, and we want young people, regardless of gender, to come and learn about these players and be inspired by these players and get into the community fan base that exists for these leagues, because it's unlike any other fan base in the country.
And I think that's really important and key there is the aspect of something can be really fun and enjoyable, no matter what it is, whether it's a league, whether it's learning a new skill in a business, in whatever it might be. But it can be enjoyable and fun and educational at the same time. And the best time is when you're getting enjoyment out of it because you don't even realize what you're learning. And um, I in college had a professor who taught baseball statistics. He wrote the book on baseball statistics. The movie Moneyball, he had a role in it. It was great. And one thing he always said is when you're providing stats, stats are stats. But what's the story along with the stats? And I think that's so important to data sometimes, no matter what it is, what statistical data it could be, can be boring, right? It's numbers on a page. It can be thousands of lines of data, depending on what you're looking at. So, how can you make it fun? And
Mm.
learning data and thinking about how you can make it fun along the way can really pick up tools and transcend along many different things. If you're able to understand women's statistics and then take those stats and, be able to play league and win a league, that can transcend to how you understand different stats in different environments. How does that play a role once you understand how something plays a role in the end game? Okay, so it played a role, it connected that way in this lane, in the next lane, how does that connect? And I think when you start to make all the connections in your different lanes, it will end up helping you grow individually as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think too, like one of the things I think even that might exist or that we're helping create that could even help actual like players is the whole like projections piece. Like there's no projections of stats of really any sort, um, like game to game, that really exist across the leagues in this country. And so even like how is this person going to do against this defense, or this goalkeeper going to do against this offense, that kind of stuff is something that we're creating. We're helping to build that project, which is really cool. And yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's just come to mind as you've been talking is, um, she plays got it start down in Orlando, Florida, where Marta is still playing. Marta, arguably over her career, best soccer player in the world. And when I was starting She Plays, she was on our team, and I would be in a sports bar and like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, like, have you heard of the Pride? Like, can you believe Marta's here?" And sadly, like, people were like, "Who?" I was like, "Oh my gosh, if this was Cristiano Ronaldo, even if you don't follow soccer, you'd know this name. Like, he'd be all over the city too, but you'd know this name." And, And so my dream right then was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want people need to know the Martas for sure, but I also want to be in a sports bar and overhear them saying the 14th person on the bench and like, "Oh yeah, maybe she'll get in today," or like, I don't know, again, one of these like not so uh, internationally known names that would become just like part of regular sports bar discussion because they see them on this app or they, they're paying a little bit more attention to the teams that aren't in their local market because of this kind of gaming. So it gives, yeah, like brand recognition to players and teams that aren't in local markets. And yeah, it's just a unique thing. And I think the stats are just a fun part, a fun like you can get really nerdy with it if you want, really nerdy with it. But it's also just fun to think like, oh, this person might do really well this week. I wonder why. Like but do they have a history with them, or is there, like, a weakness in this defense, or it's really cool to, like you said, see the stories emerge from the data.
And that is so important. And there's a lot of conversations we've had so far about the types of conversations you have had since starting She Plays and starting down this journey of going, there's a missing piece in the puzzle. And I'm looking for this, and why isn't it there? So, what are your hopes, or what are you hoping to bring to different conversations at different tables, to different individuals as She Plays continues to grow that might not be or might not have happened prior to this all kind of transpiring and, your goals and the brand occurring?
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, it's people to know about these leagues that maybe they've never heard of. Again, some leagues that are years old, and people just never knew, like, a lot of people don't know that there are, 2 major women's tackle football leagues in the country, and then, like, a lot others. So, first off, it's just, like, knowing that there are other leagues out there and people worth covering, because they're doing amazing things, and then I think too, yeah, it's just the dedication to stats. It's the investment in stats, it's the investment in projections and analysis. I think it's when I look at, um, Sirius XM radio, or I think of all the TV shows and channels that exist for fantasy sports. I mean, there are radio channels and TV channels dedicated to fantasy sports now. I want women's sports to be in there. I know that there's, like, my one of my friends is doing a little bit for WNBA, at ESPN, but, like, taking the landscape as a whole and really just allowing women's sports to be a part of that conversation and to have an hour on the radio and at minimum, and have a, TV show that brings up all these names, and, I think that's things that we hope for. That's parts of this vertical that are wide open that we're really excited about.
And I think it's thinking about the bigger picture as well. You know, when you start something, you're like, and you're on that journey. Sometimes it's tiring, long days. Like Ashley has said, there's missing pieces to the puzzle, especially when you're really trying to innovate something. And maybe it's not an innovation of the idea, because, for example, like Ashley said, and we all are aware, there's fantasy leagues for men's sports. So Ashley wasn't creating a brand new concept that never existed before. It is a concept, but for women's sports, it isn't something that we know much about that's out there, and it can be hard, but it's what can you bring to the table today? What ideas? But also those conversations you hope that start to transpire because of the conversations you're having today. And not just with the people in the room, but what do you want other individuals, the person who's watching a game, someone who's, going and finding your product online through your website. What do you hope they take away from that experience and then can talk about? And I think that's really important to keep in mind sometimes is what you're doing today can really affect the trajectory of an industry, of what people know and their knowledge base and their skills. How, innovating this business in general, when you think about it, and then especially in women's sports, can be challenging. And how do you say, okay, I'm going to innovate a business, and what skills you need to kind of sit there and be able to, when something doesn't exist, solve that problem or just build something from the ground up? How have you handled that innovation aspect?
Ooh, good big question. Yeah. So again, it all comes down to you have to have passion, and there has to be a market, right? So like you have to be able to at least prove in the beginning that yeah, people want this, whether they've been like for fantasy, they've been trying to do it on their own for years and it's just too hard. Um, or yeah, has worked on the men's side and why wouldn't it work on the women's, that kind of thing. I think I am very much like the big vision dreamer kind of person, and so I think some of that has come a little bit more easily to me as far as, like, thinking of innovation and something new, and not every founder has to have that, right? Like, some founders and part of a team needs to be the, like, day to day, "Okay, how do we go from here to there?" So it's surrounding yourself with great people, finding team members that for us, they came out of the woodwork, like they've heard of what we were doing and we were like, I want in on that. So it's, creating something and then the people, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. Um, but I will say it gets hard. It gets very hard. It's being a founder is definitely like things will keep you up at night, worrying about your team and about what comes next. The lifeline I have had is like finding a community of other founders that we can encourage each other on like days where it's really hard for me. They'll lift me up and like vice versa. Or we celebrate each other's wins because no one else is doing that or like knows to do that. Um, but I think too, like remembering we're a part of a line. I'm a part of a line of women who have come before and will come after, but hopefully not so many have to come after that are still like trailblazing in a way. And just to know like that people have been doing this for decades and had, like Billie Jean King had to do it on a court, like in public. So remembering and being inspired by their journey and knowing that in creating something new, there's always going to be difficulty when you're chopping down the trail, but that hopefully it means that people coming in the future, don't have as hard a time, that don't have to do as much of this, like, heavy lifting, but can really just enjoy or find new business opportunities because of what's been created and changed in the landscape.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into being a founder and being innovative along the way. What has been something that you have challenged with, or you've been like, I kind of wish someone kind of mentored me and told me that this might happen, or,
Oh,
I kind of knew about this before, that you would tell someone else who's starting out, whether it's a totally new industry and creating something and a community from the ground up, or is just trying to grow themselves?
ooh, good question. Um, One thing that I struggled with in the beginning and have since mellowed, but I wish I had heard sooner, was, um, there's time. Right? Like, there's I think any founder who has this idea that they're really passionate about, they're like, "Oh, someone's gonna steal this idea. Someone's gonna take it." And sometimes that gets, like, reinforced in conversations in, like, certain programs, but I no longer subscribe to that belief. I think that there's plenty of things, even, like, phones and sodas and, like, there's choice in everything, right? There's choice in almost every market, and so, to just I wish someone had said, like, "Relax and don't rush something, just think it through, go step by step." And then I do wish I had had more wisdom going into app production. assume some things that weren't true, or, you know, uh, we've been working with people who are overseas and don't know the sports as well, and so, you know, thinking someone was maybe translating, how the sport works, and maybe seeing that that wasn't the case. So, yeah, I think, like, having someone kind of I've never built an app, I've never done that, and so, yeah, if I had even taken the time to learn, like, "Oh, you need to be, like, exactly clear on what's wanted because the coder is just gonna look at this and go." There's no, like, okay, I don't wanna say there's tons of thinking on the coding side, but they're not, reimagining your idea there. They're, like, getting creative in how they do things, but, like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I
I know
think
what
that
you're saying.
that
They're
process.
they're taking it and they're writing the code for what you want, and they might
Yeah.
implement it in an easier way to get from point A to point B, but they're taking your words and going, "Okay, this is what we need to implement." So sometimes it's being more clear and concise to get that point across in the way that you want it to come off, so you create a product you want, right?
Yeah, and just doing way more work beforehand to make sure everything is as you want it, so then it gets coded, because then it just gets expensive if you're changing things after it's been coded. So, like, doing more of the, like, pre-coding side, making sure that everything is understood, all the logic and all the rules, everything that you want, that it's just, when it's handed to the coder, that it's pretty, fail safe.
And I think you brought up an important part of that conversation of knowing what you want and what you want your outcome to be. Because when you communicate clearly and concisely, there's less room for, you know, misinterpretation, but it will save you money.
Mm,
Because when sometimes you don't say exactly what you want or you don't know, and it could go one or two ways. They can deliver and it could be amazing and it could be exactly what you want, or you can be like, I was thinking it was going to be this, and we provided this service or product, and there's a big gap in between. And now we have to sit down and we have to spend money redesigning. We have to spend money on, having employees in there working and that expense. And then we have to resend it out to be done. So now you need more time on that end. And then there's, okay, are we rushing it because you've announced the product's going to be out or service is going to be launched on this date? Or, and now you're paying rush fees. There's so many things that can snowball from that one thing. So it's always important, no matter your conversation, if you have an idea in mind, and sometimes there's conversations, Ashley, I know you probably have it, I have it, where I have this idea in my head, it's not clear, and I'm like, "Let's all talk about it," because everyone in the room is going we're gonna piggyback off each other, and that's gonna, you know, the knowledge sharing in the room will land us to what we want. But sometimes there's also those moments where you're like, no, this is what it's got to be. And if you don't just say, this is what it's got to be, it can snowball into a totally different thing. Um, and the other piece of that I think that is really important is knowing not to rush. Like you said, Ashley, when you're starting a business, you sometimes it's the slow and steady that win the race. Because when you rush it, it can either, it's not what you wanted and you're redoing it, like we just talked about. It's your customers aren't happy because you didn't provide it the way you said you were going to provide it. It didn't meet their expectations. You see that in the car business a lot right now. You see, companies because of a chip shortage. And I was actually just having this discussion the other day. There's things that have become order qualifiers. There's things the customers walk in the door and say, I expect this to be provided. Um, and the example I was using the other day was in a luxury car, you now expect, to have your rear camera on most of the cars, to have a front camera, or at least sensors. It's a luxury car, you expect it. With the chip shortage, what I've noticed is luxury car brands are saying, okay, we'll give you the back camera, but we're not giving you the front or the sensors, or just on this model, or we'll take it off this. So it makes you get into a different model. And the conversation was, you're taking an order qualifier that someone's walking in the door and has now become custom to expecting, and trying to make that an order winner, something that's going to make someone buy your product versus someone else. So understanding the difference and saying, okay, these are what we need for our customers, and this will set us apart, is a big gap. And sometimes it's not rushing to get it done just so you can be everyone else. It's understanding the process and understanding that your quality and your order winners will outbeat everyone if you put in the time and effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ashley, what are the leagues if someone wants to go on and play a fantasy league with She Sports? What are the leagues you are currently offering?
Yeah, so right now the soccer league and the WNFC tackle football league are live. We will roll out basketball in May, which we're really excited about. And our first league that we launched with was ice hockey, the PHF Premier Hockey Federation. So yeah, we'll hopefully have that back next December. Yeah, and just starting with these leagues, really excited for them. I mean, I think the user base has been phenomenal, and like knowing that we're building something, and so there's been a lot of like conversation back and forth on what we can improve, and we want to have those conversations. We know like we are building this for fans, and so we want to hear what's not working, what do you want to see in the future. But yeah, we've been really excited. We've had over 1,200 people playing, which is really exciting, and that's with like no marketing spend. So we might be boosting that a little bit coming up, but yeah, just really excited that word of mouth is spreading, and this thing that people have wanted for years is finally out there and like on their phone.
And I think that's great. And I'm so excited to see for the growth of the community, whether it's on She Plays and the website and the app itself and that community, but also for women's sports in general and what this will do. Because like you had said earlier, I really do agree with you that with fantasy sports and what you're doing with She Plays, it really will help the conversation in those different environments, and learning players and learning their stories and getting involved, because once you get involved in that level, you want them to succeed, and you get really hyped when they win and all the things come into place, and it can really grow the different leagues overall and really help the growth of women's sports and the equality there as well. Ashley, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, well, we're at She Plays Pro on all of the social media accounts. Like you said, I'm on LinkedIn, Ashley Hart, she-plays.com. You can do contact at she-plays.com is a email. And one thing I just want to say really quickly, one thing that we're doing that's a little different is we have rolling start dates for our leagues. So it's okay that the leagues have already started actual play, whereas most apps would have cut off any league starting. Your fantasy leagues can start anytime throughout the season, and they will get started the Monday after you draft. So it's not too late to sign up to download the app on Google Play or Apple.
And I think that's great. I really love that you don't, with She Plays, you don't have to be there the moment season starts. If you learn about the app at a different point, you can still join in on the fun and you can still join the community. Thank you, Ashley Hart, for all of your insight today. A few of our key takeaways from today's conversation is you can build your airplane as you're on the runway. Think about that. Sometimes you can build it as you're testing it, as you're about to go, and that is okay. That could bring some of the excitement. As well as learning and education can be fun. When you bring something to the table that's fun, that you want to do, that you're passionate about, you can go into a dive of education that you don't even know you're intaking until later on, as well as find your community and help build and grow. When you find your community, whether it's other founders starting out and being able to cheer them up or celebrate those wins, or it's a community of people who want to do women's fantasy sports. And when you find it really transcends across everything you're doing and your passion and your interest. And it will really not just build yourself, but build others around you. So thank you, Ashley, again for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Ashley Hart. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.